Wavelength.
Mental illness doesn't have to be a life sentence.
Alcohol addiction, abuse, misuse is the same all over the globe.
Sparking the combos about Adelaide.
So it made me feel very confident that if we did have it in the state, we were going to know about it.
You should be having.
There'll be guys that are trained, but they don't feel like they're good enough to take their shirt off.
Almost everyone is a culprit of doom scrolling. Anyone who has a mobile phone.
On Fresh 92.7.
Welcome to Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having. I'm your host, Hamish, and tonight I am joined by the lovely David.
Hello, Hamish. Nice to be on the show. How are you doing this weekend?
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad.
Cool.
I'm still recovering from the weekend. Watching my team, Port Adelaide, go down by 70 points to the Bulldogs on Saturday night. So, yeah, still pretty dusty from that. Still hurting quite a bit, not going to lie.
Crushing.
Yeah, dragged myself into oblivion that night and tried to find my dignity at the bottom of a bag of Doritos. So that was pretty much just like any Saturday night, really, for me. But what about yourself, Dave?
You're looking for dignity in the wrong place, mate.
I don't know about that. What about you? How was your weekend?
Look, I mean, it was a pretty chill weekend. Didn't do a whole lot, but I'm feeling a bit off, feeling a bit weird. I don't feel myself. And I've talked to a few people. They sort of feel the same way, and I was like,
Oh, okay.
I'm not a huge astrology guy. I want to make that clear.
Okay.
But
Here we go.
I'm looking for the answers in the stars this week.
Yeah, at least you're not looking at for them in the bottom of a Dorito bag. So that's okay. That's something.
So my friend said that apparently Mars has moved from one planet to another, and that has changed things. And it's also...
What do you mean Mars has moved from one planet to another? Isn't it a planet itself?
I wish I knew. I'm just going off what I've been told by the experts here.
Yeah, the experts, right. Yep.
I'm feeling a bit off. Maybe it's the weather. Maybe it's Mars.
Maybe it's the Mercury
I don't know.
retrograde. Yeah.
I'm hoping this week will be a better one for me, though.
Me too. But look, next, we're chatting about Qantas's move to ban unvaccinated travellers from flying overseas. And also tonight on Wavelength, David, we'll be chatting to some sex workers about sex work and the proposed change coming in to legalise it. We're going to be discussing whether this approach is the best way forward. You're listening to Wavelength.
Wavelength.
Welcome back to Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having. We hope you're having a brilliant Monday. This week, David, Qantas decided it was definitely going to ban unvaccinated people from flying overseas. David, could you fill us on what they actually said?
Yeah, a bit of a controversial move, really. So this week, the Qantas boss, Alan Joyce, he came out and said that the airline will mandate COVID-19 vaccinations for all passengers flying overseas ahead of its relaunching of its international routes, which they're hoping to actually achieve by Christmas. It's also comes after Qantas announced in August that they're going to require all employees to be fully vaccinated against COVID by 31st of March. And frontline employees, so that's the people on the planes, the pilots, the staff, just giving out your goodies, your little your bags of snacks. They're going to be fully vaccinated by the 15th of November. So these are the actual quotes. So Joyce told the Trans-Tasman Business Circle on Tuesday that Qantas will have a policy that internationally will only be carrying vaccinated passengers because we think that's going to be one of the requirements to show that you're flying safe and getting into those countries. And they're hoping that can happen by Christmas. I mean, it's just the latest in this whole vaccine passport debate, really. Should we have one? Is this the right move to be able to get international travel back up in the air? I mean, I'd love to go overseas, to be honest, myself. What do you reckon, Hamish?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think the fact that international travel could be back on the cards as soon as Christmas is both awesome but pretty crazy.
I can't believe that.
It's pretty scary, actually, to think about it. It seems like, obviously, things have been off the cards for quite a while now, and they're wanting to get that ball rolling again as quickly as possible, and that's totally understandable. Huge amounts of profits that have been lost in that industry over the last almost 2 years now. Yeah, we're talking astronomical amounts of money, so it totally makes sense. Do you think we should be getting back to overseas travel as quickly as that, though, even with safeguards and measures in place in regards to fully vaccinated staff members and travellers? Obviously, I think that's, if you're going to do it, that's absolutely the right way to go about it. But is that going to mitigate the risk enough?
It's a tough one, isn't it? Because, I mean, if you're fully vaccinated, you've protected yourself against COVID, and hopefully you're not going to be spreading it around to people as much as you would be if you weren't vaccinated, and you'll also be able to travel safer than if you were unvaccinated. And I guess you're going overseas, so you're going to other countries. Obviously, they have to let us in first. Like, they're not going to... by Christmas, I don't think we'll be able to go literally wherever we want.
No.
I think it's going to be restricted to a certain number of countries. I think they've got Singapore on the cards, Japan, Hong Kong.
Parts of Europe.
New Zealand, parts of Europe, potentially America as well. Don't know if I'd want to go there though, right now.
That's got nothing to do with COVID. It's just, I mean, yeah. I don't really know if I want to visit a place that's on the brink of a second civil war.
Right. I mean, my question though is, well, should we? Yeah, I mean, I guess if you're fully vaccinated, I feel personally, we should be able to get to a point where we are able to get back to our normal lives. Will we be able to? I don't know. I think maybe it's a bit optimistic by Christmas. Yeah. I think that by Christmas, there'll still be a lot of restrictions in place in Australia. I don't think we'll be back to life as we knew it before. I don't know if we ever will be back to life as we know it before, to be honest. I mean, come on, it's the 20th anniversary of September 11 yesterday, or on Saturday, and... I mean, that changed the way we live forever. We can't go to the airport the same way ever again because of that, you know? COVID's going to do the same thing.
Definitely. Yeah. There'll be fundamental aspects of life that will never be the same. But I think at the same time, some of those claims are a little bit, or maybe a little bit overblown. Those changes will be more subtle than I think people realise, more nuanced than people realise. I think for the most part, in 5-10 years, we will be mostly back to normal, but there'll be those after effects for sure. Like the whole idea of just generally practicing better hygiene and better health practices and things like that, I think are things that will stick around for quite a long time, maybe forever.
Hopefully. I mean, they're good practices.
Exactly. and I think with stuff like that, what's the problem? With changes like that, there's no problem with having that. But yeah, I mean, these vaccination digital passports are interesting because in industries like the air travel industry, makes total sense. Yeah. But you're seeing it kind of drip through to many, many different aspects of life now. And I don't know. I just don't know if it's really the right way to go. That's where it starts to feel like it's getting a little bit dystopic when you can't go to the pub for a beer without showing a vaccine passport. What do you think?
I'm with you. I think it's getting a bit absurd at this point. But I mean, we got to protect each other.
Absolutely. Look, anyway, coming up later in the show, we're going to be chatting about proposed changes to sex worker laws here in SA.
You're listening to Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
Wavelength.
Welcome back to Wavelength with Hamish and David tonight, sparking the conversations about Adelaide you should be having. So the other week, the South Australian Police Commissioner Grant Stevens weighed in on a topic that's been up for debate in our parliament for a number of years now, and that is about the decriminalisation of sex work.
Yeah, that's right. Currently, SA Greens member Tammy Franks is pushing to have sex work removed from the state's criminal code, which would essentially decriminalise it. Since then, Grant Stevens has made his position clear that he would only support a move to decriminalise sex work if a number of regulations would be introduced. He's saying that would stop an insurgence of organised crime coming into the industry.
To find out what this whole debate is about, Amila spoke with the General Manager of SIN, Scott Morrison.
Wavelength.
In the 14th attempt to decriminalise prostitution in the state, the South Australian Police are advising the industry requires regulation and suitable police authorities. But would a regulatory model actually help the people working in the industry? I talked to Sex Industry Network's General Manager, Scott Morrison, about how licensing sex work would impact the industry and why decriminalisation without it is so important.
In regard to licensing frameworks, there are other states and territories that have licensing legislation. So in Queensland, for example, after 20 years of licensing, less than 10% of brothels are actually operating within those licensing parameters. Victoria and their licensing framework, only 50% of sex workers, again, are operating within a legal context, which means the other 50% are operating outside of the law. In criminalised settings, we find 100%, obviously, of sex workers who are working outside of the law. And under decrim, generally, less than 25% of sex workers are operating illegally. And those 25% are usually just street-based sex workers who are just working in the wrong place, for example.
I mean, there's the kind of notion that organised crime would increase if sex work was to be decriminalised. Is there any weight to that claim?
So, look, SAPOL would actually have us believe that organised crime is actually rampant right now within the sex industry, whether, we're looking at licensing, decriminalisation or criminalisation. So our lived experience as sex workers in SA is that there is no high levels of organised crime. The majority of sex workers in South Australia are sole traders, private workers working for themselves, or collectives, co-ops of workers working together. No sign of bikies at all. Anywhere, basically. We've also seen in other states and territories that have introduced decriminalisation that there hasn't been an increase in organised crime at all. There's been no evidence forthcoming that decriminalisation equals an increase in organised crime in the sex industry.
What happens to the workers that fall outside of the regulatory model being proposed?
Well, the same thing I would imagine would happen to them as what happens here in South Australia. So they'd be targeted by police. So that means that they'd have the same concerns and considerations that we have here in this criminalised model. So you'd go to work, you'd be worried about whether or not the police are going to knock on your door, you'd be worried about whether or not they're going to use your safer sex products as evidence. So all of those issues, all of those considerations, are you going to be arrested and charged? Are you then going to get a criminal record, which is going to provide another barrier to gaining any other kind of employment in the future if you decide to exit the sex industry? All of those sorts of things.
I guess in terms of the future, are you hopeful that sex work can be decriminalised without having that regulatory framework in place?
I am concerned that South Australia will take on a licensing framework because there is this kind of, ingrained fear and this belief that decriminalisation means no regulation, which isn't true. So decriminalisation basically means that the sex industry will be beholden to all of the same industrial legislations and safeguards that any other industry is beholden to. So, we've got the scaffolding already, the legislative scaffolding already to have decriminalisation and to have sex work to be successful within that context. I just don't know. We've got such a conservative group of politicians at the moment that just seem really dedicated to believing all of these myths and stereotypes that are being put forward around, sex work being inherently violent and exploitative and that it objectifies women and all of those kind of things, instead of actually listening to the lived experience and the voices of South Australian sex workers, the United Nations, the World Health Organisation, even Nicola Spurrier, our Chief Public Health Officer, who actually supports the decriminalisation of the sex industry as the best health and wellbeing outcome for South Australian sex workers.
Can the relationship between sex workers and the police be repaired?
There's a really fractured relationship between sex workers and SAPOL, and look, that's to be expected after decades and decades of criminalisation and stigma and discriminatory attitudes and heavy-handed policing. I don't know that we're necessarily going to see changes between that relationship overnight if we do usher in decrim. But the one thing that decriminalisation will provide sex workers is a pathway to report crimes committed against us. So whether that's crimes committed within a professional context or a personal context, we will be able to go to the police and report those crimes without fear of reprisal. So without fear of being arrested and charged because, we're disclosing our sex worker status, without fear that we're going to suddenly appear on SAPOL's radar because we're having to disclose that we're sex workers.
Wavelength.
Thanks for that, Amila. We've got more on the decriminalisation of sex work here in SA later in the show, but up next, I'll be letting you know all about this week's news. You're listening to Wavelength. Welcome back to Wavelength. Now, we're cracking into our weekly segment where I explain what the hell has happened this week.
What the hell is going on this week? Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
This week, the Prime Minister came under fire for travelling to Sydney to see his kids for Father's Day, which would normally be a lovely, wholesome gesture if portions of the country weren't forced to stay inside their homes over the weekend, foregoing such a luxury. It was a move that was as tone-deaf as an audition on Australian Idol, and it's safe to say ScoMo must be racking up a hell of a lot of frequent flyer miles at this point. Of course, who could forget his not-so-secret stay in Hawaii when the rest of the country was literally in flames? After that incident, Mr. Morrison admitted that the office won't do that again and that you learn from these things. Do you, though? Meanwhile, on the subject of politicians skirting their responsibilities, Sydney said goodbye to their new favourite pastime, Berejiklian bingo, as the New South Wales Premier finally said, "Screw you guys, I'm going home," and announced she would no longer be doing daily press conferences on case numbers. Instead, Gladys will be posting updates from her jacuzzi after quad-dropping a few quaaludes. Staying with COVID news, New South Wales Health Minister Kerry Chant said the 3 words you never ever say during a coronavirus press conference, and those words are New World Order. Yep, that happened, and it wasn't long before her comments went viral, giving conspiracy theorists around the world the validation their mothers obviously never did. Because clearly, when the lizard people first began forming their all-star team to take over the world, at the top of their list was, let me check my notes here, the Chief Medical Officer for New South Wales. Of course. Lastly, McDonald's finally answered an age-old question this week that has puzzled man for decades. Just what the hell is Grimace? Now, I always just thought he was the cancerous tumour you eventually developed from eating McDonald's, but alas, apparently he is a literal taste bud. Because that's not terrifying at all. Seriously, was the entire marketing team at McDonald's in the 90s on acid? You had a creepy clown who's probably on a government watch list, a convicted felon, and goddamn Grimace, a sentient goblet of skin and muscle. I'll tell you what, I'm not loving it. And that's what the hell's been happening this week.
Wavelength.
Thanks for that, Hamish. As usual, hilarious. Grimace is shaped like a friend. That is all he is to me. That is all he ever will be to me. I refuse to believe that he's a taste bud. What? A taste bud?
Shaped like a friend.
He is shaped like a friend.
He feels the geometric proportions of what you would imagine would embody a friend.
Yes, if you...
Are you telling me all your friends look like Grimace? Because
hey, I
take offence to that.
I don't fat shame here on my but Grimace is a beautiful friend. Moving on from Grimace, ScoMo travelling. He did it again this weekend. He went back to Sydney.
Back
did you know?
at it, isn't he?
One, I get it. Yeah, of course he wants to go see his kids. He's been working pretty hard in Canberra, doing his thing, whatever it is he does. Don't really understand
me neither,
it still.
but apparently he does stuff.
But as someone with a sister in Sydney, I would kill to be able to go and see her right now.
Yeah.
It's just like...
Absolutely. It's a bit of a slap in the face, isn't it?
Oh, it's a wet fish in the face, really.
Yeah, and they talk about, he was granted a specific or special exemption or whatever, and it's just, it really does rub you, and I imagine a lot of other people, the wrong way, because, I read a story just the other day of a woman who flew from London to Queensland to be with her sick father, not long after Father's Day. This was a couple of days after Father's Day, and she had to watch her dad die on a Zoom call.
Yeah,
that's what she had to do because she was not able to receive a special exemption because she's not the Prime Minister. That's what that says to me. Yep. You're not a powerful world leader, so you don't get that exemption. That's the only basis on which it was granted to ScoMo.
Loud and clear. I couldn't agree with you more on that. It's that just makes me die inside.
Yeah. And it's very frustrating and very annoying for a lot of people out there, I can imagine. At the moment, you're listening to Wavelength.
Wavelength.
Welcome back to Wavelength. So earlier on in the show, we got to hear from Sin about the proposed changes to sex work here in SA. But what about sex workers themselves?
Yeah, I spoke with a sex worker who goes by the name of BigBoy this week about what it's currently like to work here in SA compared to how it is interstate and what changes they'd like to see to the laws.
Wavelength.
BigBoy, welcome to Wavelength. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Thank you for coming on the show. So today we're talking about laws about sex workers in South Australia. And first I'd like to get to know a bit about you. Can you tell me a bit about yourself and your experience in the industry?
I started in the industry 3 years ago. So I do full service sex work and I work privately mostly. I also work in establishments. I'm a writer, performance artist, and activist.
You do it all.
I'm doing the most.
You really are. No, that's fantastic. Can you tell me a bit about what the proposed changes would mean for how you would work here in South Australia?
So currently, South Australia has the only criminalised model in Australia. So that means that there is no legal way to work as a sex worker. And the SA Pol have actively been entrapping workers, filming workers, raiding massage parlours that kind of present themselves as massage parlours but are actually brothels. They are very horrible to workers. I've heard stories of girls being dragged out of bookings by their hair, in towels. The onus is on the client. So if the client says that this is a brothel, and that they were having sex, then the worker and the establishment gets shut down and the worker faces jail time. So now the SA Pol are wanting to do legalisation, not criminalisation. So legalisation means that there will still be some forms of sex work that are illegal. In other states in Australia, currently in Victoria, they are passing the decriminalisation model, but they have had a legalisation under the Sex Work Act of 1994. So street work is illegal, massage parlours are illegal, escort within a hotel is illegal, you're not allowed to have anyone working with you, and you have to have an SWA, which means that you are licensed, and that goes on your permanent record. We've been asking for decriminalisation for a really long time because that means that we don't face jail time for any form of work that we do or engage in. We want a safe workplace. We want safe workplaces. We want to be protected if anything goes wrong, because people don't feel able to tell the police if something happens when they're working illegally, because there is a very, very long history of police abusing their powers against us. And when we're breaking the law, even though the crime that's committed against us is way more grievous than what we are doing, they will target us instead of the attacker.
Sure. And you've worked in a number of different states around the country, in different types of regulation, in decriminalised states, in legalised states, in illegal states like South Australia. How does it compare, and how safe do you feel, I suppose, working in South Australia to a place like Victoria, to Sydney, to even the Northern Territory?
So in South Australia, I definitely do not feel safe. I've noticed that the clientele are very different. They do not respect the rates. They do not respect when I say that I don't do natural services and will not have sex without a condom. I feel like when I'm working very on edge because I'm scared of being entrapped by the police. I'm scared that one of my clients is going to come in and film me and that be the police and used against me in evidence.
And what kind of sort of regulation or laws would you like to see passed in South Australia that would make working in South Australia safer for you?
I would love decriminalisation. I would love the anti-discrimination bill, and I would like workplace, like OH&S laws to be passed. I would like for sex workers to be able to have sick leave. I would like for brothel workers and strip clubs to go from independent contractors to employees. So girls are not showing up to work and like working for the business and making no money. That is like worker exploitation. Yeah, that would be great. And yeah, I would just like to be able to work without being afraid of the police.
Wavelength.
Thanks, David, for that. Anyway, look, we've still got plenty of Wavelength left for you guys tonight, so stay tuned. You're listening to Fresh.
Wavelength.
Welcome back to Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having. So, David, we've heard from sex workers about changes to the laws here in South Australia. Let's start with the difference between the approaches, legalisation or decriminalisation. What's the main sticking points between those two?
Yeah, so right now, obviously, it's illegal. If we went with legalising, it would be new laws brought in to regulate sex workers. And as we've heard, that would be things like making it, you'd need a licence to operate, which would be with you permanently, and it would be probably publicly searchable. You'd be a licensed sex worker. The other way would be decriminalising, which would essentially just make it not a crime to do sex work, and they would be able to operate as they do now, but with the protections that come with being a worker, like the Fair Work Act. So that's things like sick leave, that's things like fair pay, all those things that come with just a regular job that everyone would do 9 to 5. So those are the two differences. The one that really sticks with me, and we were just chatting about this, is the licensing requirement.
Yeah.
The way that is just essentially being like, you have to sign up to do this legally. And if you don't want to do that, if you don't want to be publicly branded as a sex worker, which a lot of people don't want to do.
Yeah.
No shame to people who do it, but a lot of people do it quite secretly for various reasons. We don't need to go into them, but that sits weird with me. I don't know about you, Hamish.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. That was the one thing that kind of really stood out to me the most. It feels like the government's saying, okay, you want this, you got it, but you will be marked and you will be branded for life with this. And it just feels like a bit of a middle finger from the government to sex workers. It's still their way of kind of having the last laugh and, you know, still finding a way to screw these people over.
Exactly.
And not really come to the table in a respectable, rational way. Because, as you said, for various reasons, and I think those reasons are pretty obvious, not everyone wants that to be broadcasted to the world. And what about people who do want to leave that industry at some point in their lives?
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
How much more difficult is that going to be when they've got that on their permanent record for any future employers to find? So for me, I look at that and I go, that is, you know, not only really insidious by the government, but it's also basically shutting the door on them and locking them into that life, you know, not providing them any alternatives, saying, you want this, fine, but you're stuck with it now, man. You're trapped there. I think it's one of those outdated moral positions that we still have to this day.
Exactly.
And it's unfortunate because I don't see why, I can't really actually come up with any reason why it can't be treated like any other workplace and why it's not, you know, eligible for the same kind of workplace practices as any industry.
We're not talking about anything super out here either. This just got passed in Victoria the other week, what we're talking about with decriminalisation. This isn't radical per se. This is happening already in Australia. It's about time, I'd say, for South Australia to step up and join the rest of the country in making these workplaces safer for people. We heard from BigBoy just then. Yeah. They've operated, look, I know them. I know they've operated New South Wales, Victoria, Northern Territory. They're currently in Western Australia. You probably heard an interview, those beautiful birds. They were just chilling in a spa. Total respect. Amazing. But they were saying they don't feel safe working here. Yeah. They are scared of the cops. They are scared that a cop will entrap them, film them, and they will be in trouble because of it.
Absolutely. Look, couldn't agree anymore. You're listening to Wavelength.
Wavelength.
Anyway, that brings us to the end of the show tonight. Thanks so much for listening. But just quickly, David, I believe you've got a little bit of an update for us on one of our biggest rivals.
Sure do. So you listeners might remember the other week we were talking about COVID patients in America taking ivermectin, the horse deworming medicine that supposedly cures COVID.
Yes.
First of all, if you're not a horse, don't take it.
Yeah.
I'm not a doctor, but please don't take it. So
seems to be a general rule.
The update I've got is that Joe Rogan, he got COVID and he saying that he got prescribed ivermectin, the horse dewormer, by a doctor, and he recovered from COVID from it. What do you reckon?
I don't know. I got a lot of questions, really. I saw this story. I saw the headline that he'd gotten COVID and that he was now spruiking ivermectin. But I did not know that he got prescribed by a doctor. Is that true?
He said on his podcast, "Do I have to sue CNN?" They're making SHIT up, Rogan said on his podcast. They keep saying, I'm taking horse dewormer. I literally got it from a doctor. It's an American company. They won the Nobel Prize in 2015 for use in human beings. And CNN is saying I'm taking horse dewormer. They must know that's a lie. It's a horse dewormer though, mate. It is. It is. It is.
I'm so confused.
I don't know what to
spin
say.
that any other way?
I don't know what to say,
The other thing
really.
that is a bit interesting though, is that he made a full recovery. Is that true?
Well, that's what he's saying.
Did he really? Or is he just in between breaks putting the mute button on and coughing his absolute guts out?
Well, Did he recover or did he not? That's the question.
Yeah.
I mean, if we want to go with facts, though, the company that makes it, Maersk, they said, no, there is no scientific basis for a potential therapeutic effect against COVID-19 from preclinical studies. There is no meaningful evidence for clinical activity or clinical efficacy in patients with COVID-19 disease.
Any recovery is purely coincidental.
This is the company that makes ivermectin.
Yeah.
If they wanted to continue this conspiracy theory, they could definitely go out there and spruik it.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah,
they're the ones that make it. They don't want your money.
Yeah, they're the ones that have got the most to benefit from here, and even they don't want to go down this rabbit hole. Well, look, while you are tuning into the latest episode of The Joe Rogan Show, make sure you're also subscribed to the Wavelength podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else you get your damn podcasts. You can listen back to our old episodes right now, and you'll be the first to know when tonight's episode goes up.
True. Next week, hopefully Jamie will be back in the studio with us, and she'll be chatting with us about affirmative sexual consent laws in SA. Looking forward to that one.
Yes, definitely a topic that we very much need some female representation to talk about. So please, Jamie, come back. All right. Look, thanks so much for joining me this week, David. It's been a pleasure as always. We'll see you guys next Monday. Into fresh.
Wavelength.